He walked into that rundown cafe disguised as nobody, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of being Edward Thompson, one of the most powerful CEOs alive. The tired waitress who served him had every reason to be bitter, broken, defeated. But instead, she left him a note that would rip open wounds he'd buried for decades. By the time he read the second note, the one begging for help, he realized this wasn't coincidence. This was fate screaming his name. Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, you're about to witness a story that will restore your faith in humanity. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. And if you're already part of our family, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been helped by a stranger? Let's go. The bell above the door chimed softly as Edward Thompson stepped into Riverstone Cafe. No cameras followed him. No assistants trailed behind. No boardroom waited for his command. Just a man in faded denim and scuffed boots, blending into the morning crowd like fog into rain. Edward paused near the entrance, breathing in the smell of burnt toast and cheap coffee. It had been years since he'd walked into a place like this. Years since anyone had looked at him without recognition lighting up their eyes. Here, he was nobody. And God, it felt like freedom. The cafe buzzed with ordinary life. A student hunched over a laptop in the corner. An elderly couple shared a pastry by the window. Construction workers laughed over scrambled eggs at the counter. No one turned to stare. No one whispered his name. Edward's shoulders dropped an inch. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself until now. He found a booth near the back and slid in, the vinyl cracking beneath him. The wood table was scratched and worn, marked by 1,000 forgotten conversations. He ran his fingers along the edge and smiled. This was real, not the polished mahogany of his conference room. Not the crystal chandeliers of five-star restaurants where waiters knew his order before he spoke. This was life without the mask. A shadow fell across the table. "Morning. What can I get you?" Edward looked up. The waitress stood with her pen poised over a notepad, her expression neutral but kind. Her name tag read Irene. Dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, eyes that held something between weariness and warmth. She looked tired. Not the exhaustion of one long shift, but the deep-in-the-bones kind that comes from carrying weight no one else can see. Yet she smiled. Small, but genuine. Edward felt something shift in his chest. "Just coffee," he said quietly. "Black." "Coming right up." She turned to leave, and he noticed the slight drag in her step, the way her hand pressed briefly against her lower back before she straightened. Edward had spent 20 years reading people in boardrooms, spotting weakness, calculating angles, closing deals worth billions. But this wasn't a game. This woman was hurting, and she was still showing up, still smiling, still serving others with grace. Minutes later, Irene returned with his coffee, setting the cup down gently. Steam curled upward, and Edward wrapped his hands around the warmth. "Thank you." She nodded and walked away. Edward lifted the cup to drink. That's when he saw it. Tucked beneath the saucer, nearly hidden, was a small folded piece of paper. His pulse quickened as he pulled it free. The handwriting was small and hurried, written in blue ink that had bled slightly into the napkin. He unfolded it slowly, and read words that would change everything. "When kindness feels impossible, it means you need it most. Keep going. Someone sees you." Edward's breath caught. She hadn't written this for him. She couldn't have known who he was. This was meant for a stranger, for anyone who might need it. He looked up, searching for her across the cafe. Irene was at another table now, refilling someone's coffee with the same quiet grace. Edward stared at the note again, his hands trembling. He had come here to escape, to remember what it felt like to be human. But this woman, this exhausted waitress who had every reason to be bitter, had just reminded him of something he'd forgotten. The world still had goodness in it. Real, unpolished, beautiful goodness. Edward sat frozen in the booth, staring at the words until they blurred. When kindness feels impossible, it means you need it most. Keep going. Someone sees you. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket, right over his heart. For the first time in years, something inside him felt awake. He stayed longer than he planned, ordered a second coffee, then a third. Not because he wanted the caffeine, but because he wanted to watch her. Irene moved through the cafe like water finding its path. Smooth, steady, never rushing, never stopping. She refilled cups before they emptied, cleared plates with quiet efficiency, smiled at customers who barely looked up from their phones. Edward recognized that smile now. It wasn't fake, but it was armor. The kind you wear when breaking down isn't an option. An hour passed, then another. The lunch crowd thinned. Sunlight shifted through the windows, painting golden squares across the worn floor. Edward checked his watch. He should leave. His driver would be wondering where he'd gone. His assistant had probably called 6 times, but he didn't move. Finally, Irene approached his table one last time. She set down the bill, her movements slower now, more careful. "Take your time," she said softly. Her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. Edward looked up and caught something in her expression. Something beyond exhaustion. Fear. She turned to walk away. "Wait." Irene paused, glancing back. Edward reached for the bill, and that's when he saw it. Another note. This one was different. The handwriting shakier, more desperate. His chest tightened as he unfolded it. "I know this is wrong. I know I shouldn't ask. But if anyone reading this believes in miracles, my sister has 2 weeks, maybe less. The hospital says there's a treatment, but insurance won't cover it. $50,000. I've tried everything. I'm out of time. If you're someone who can help, or knows someone who can, please." Her name is Lily. She's only 9 years old. She still believes the world is good. At the bottom, a phone number, smudged, as if her hand had trembled while writing it. Edward couldn't breathe. The cafe sounds faded away. The clinking dishes, the murmured conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine. All he could hear was the roar of memory. Another hospital, another little girl, another family begging for time they couldn't afford. His sister, 23 years ago. They'd lost her because the treatment came too late, because the money wasn't there, because the system moved too slowly and life moved too fast. Edward had been 17, powerless, watching his parents crumble as Sarah's laughter faded into silence. He'd sworn then that he would never be powerless again, and he'd kept that promise. Built an empire, accumulated wealth most people couldn't fathom. But he'd forgotten why. Somewhere along the way, the money had become the point. The power had become the prize. He'd stopped seeing the faces behind the numbers, until now. Edward looked up. Irene was across the cafe, shoulders slumped as she tied on a jacket. Her manager stood nearby, arms crossed, expression hard. "Third time this month, Irene. I warned you." "I know. I'm sorry. I just need to check on her before my next shift. Please. You leave now. Don't bother coming back." Irene's face went pale. Edward watched her hands curl into fists, watched her fight back tears. She was choosing, right now, between keeping her job and seeing her dying sister. And she was choosing her sister, just like his mother had, every single time. Irene grabbed her bag and walked toward the door, head down, trying to hold herself together. Edward stood. The note crinkled in his hand. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had come here to escape his life, but maybe his life had led him here for a reason. "Irene." She stopped, turned slowly, and for the first time, Edward Thompson let a stranger see him cry. Irene turned. Her eyes met Edward's across the cafe, wide with confusion and something close to panic. She wasn't used to being seen, not really seen. Edward opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the manager's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Are you really doing this right now, in front of a customer?" Irene's face flushed. She looked down quickly, clutching her bag tighter. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hewitt. You just nothing." The manager stepped closer, his voice rising. "Do you know how many people would kill for this job? How many applications I have sitting on my desk right now?" The cafe had gone quiet. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused mid-air. Everyone was watching. Edward's jaw clenched. Irene stood perfectly still, her shoulders curving inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. Trying to disappear. "I have given you chance after chance," Hewitt continued, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "But you keep pushing, keep making excuses. What makes you so special, huh?" Irene said nothing. She just stood there and took it. Edward watched her hands shake, watched her bite the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. And she didn't fight back. Not because she couldn't, but because she couldn't afford to. This job was all she had. The only thing keeping food on the table while her sister fought for her life. So she swallowed her pride. Let herself be humiliated. Let this small man with his small power tear her down in front of strangers. Because losing dignity was better than losing everything. Edward felt something cold settle in his chest. He knew this game. He'd seen it played 1,000 times in boardrooms and corner offices. The powerful crushing the powerless simply because they could. He'd turned away from it before, told himself it wasn't his problem. That business was business, and sentiment had no place in strategy. But sitting here, watching this woman accept cruelty with grace she shouldn't have to possess, something inside him broke. Or maybe, for the first time in years, something inside him woke up. "I understand," Irene whispered. "It won't happen again." Hewitt snorted. "It better not. Now get back to work. Table 6 needs clearing." Irene nodded once and moved past Edward without looking at him. Her eyes were glass, one blink away from shattering. The cafe slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed. Forks clinked against plates. Everyone moved on. Like they hadn't just watched someone's soul get stepped on. Edward sat back down slowly. His coffee had gone cold. He stared at the note still clutched in his hand. She still believes the world is good. Did she? After everything? After working herself to exhaustion for scraps? After being humiliated for caring about her dying sister? After watching the world take and take and take and never give anything back? Did Lily still believe? Or had Irene written those words because she was desperately trying to believe them herself? Edward pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. He could walk away. Forget this ever happened. Go back to his penthouse and his meetings and his carefully controlled life. No one would ever know he'd been here. But he would know. And that note would sit in his pocket like a burning coal until it consumed him. He dialed. 1 ring. 2. "Mr. Thompson, is everything all right?" His assistant's voice was sharp with concern. Edward never called during his off days. "Marcus, I need you to do something for me." Quietly. "Of course, sir." Edward glanced toward the kitchen where Irene had disappeared. "I need full background on a woman named Irene Jonathan. Works at Riverstone Cafe on East 23rd. I need to know about her sister, Lily. Medical situation, hospital, attending physicians, insurance status, everything." A pause. "Sir, is this related to—" "And I need the ownership structure of this cafe. Who runs it? Who owns it? Financial records if you can get them legally. How quickly do you need this?" Edward watched Hewitt bark orders at another waitress. His face red with petty authority. "By tonight." "Understood." Edward ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He left cash on the table. Far more than the bill required. Then he stood and walked toward the door. As he passed the counter, Hewitt looked up. For just a moment, their eyes met. The manager saw nothing but a man in old denim. A nobody. Edward smiled slightly and walked out into the afternoon sun. The storm was coming. Hewitt just didn't know it yet. The storm is brewing, and you won't believe what happens next. If you're feeling this story, smash that like button right now. It helps more people find stories that matter. And stay tuned, because what Edward discovers about Irene will leave you speechless. Edward walked 3 blocks before he stopped. The city moved around him. Taxis honked. People rushed past with coffee cups and briefcases. The world kept spinning like it always did. But Edward stood frozen on the corner of 5th and Madison, his hand pressed against his chest, against the note burning in his pocket. His phone buzzed. Marcus, probably. Already digging into Irene's life with the efficiency Edward paid him for. But Edward couldn't move, because he wasn't standing on a street corner in the present anymore. He was 12 years old again, standing in another cafe, watching his mother smile at strangers who never smiled back. The memory crashed over him like a wave. Rosie's Diner, Pittsburgh, 1987. His mother, Ann Thompson, had worked the morning shift 6 days a week, 7 when they needed the money, which was always. Edward would sit in the corner booth doing homework on stained laminate, the smell of grease and burnt coffee soaking into his clothes. He'd watch her move between tables with that same tired grace, the same armor smile. She never complained, not when customers snapped their fingers at her like she was a dog. Not when her manager screamed at her for being 30 seconds late because the bus had broken down. Not when she worked doubles and came home with swollen ankles and empty pockets because nobody tipped the tired-looking waitress. She just kept going. For him. But Edward remembered the night everything changed. He'd been 13. His father had been gone for 2 years. The eviction notice had come that morning, printed on yellow paper that might as well have been a death sentence. 3 days to vacate. His mother had stared at that paper for an hour without moving. Then she'd put on her uniform and gone to work. Edward had followed her to the diner that night, hiding across the street. He didn't know why, just knew he couldn't be alone. He'd watched through the window as she served her last table of the night. A man in an expensive suit. Probably a businessman passing through. Probably someone who wouldn't remember her face 5 minutes after leaving. Edward had seen his mother hesitate. Then she'd pulled a napkin from her apron, written something quickly, and slipped it under the man's check. Her hands had been shaking. Edward remembered that. The way her hands shook as she walked away. The man had read the note, looked up, called her back. They'd talked for 10 minutes. When she came home that night, she was crying. But for the first time in years, she was smiling too. The man's name was Richard Morrison. He owned a construction company. He'd given Ann a job in his office. Better pay, benefits, stability. And he'd paid their back rent, all of it, because of a note. Because one woman had found the courage to ask for help, and one man had found the grace to give it. Richard Morrison had saved their lives, and years later, he'd mentored Edward. Taught him about business, helped him get into college, opened doors that would have stayed locked forever. Edward had built his empire on the foundation of that one act of kindness. And then he'd forgotten. Somewhere between the first million and the first billion, he'd forgotten what it felt like to need someone. He'd forgotten what it cost to ask. He'd forgotten his mother's shaking hands. Until today. Until Irene. Edward pulled out the note and read it again. I know this is wrong. I know I shouldn't ask. But if anyone reading this believes in miracles... His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes, baby, the bravest thing you can do is let someone help you. Edward's vision blurred. 38 years. 38 years since his mother had slipped a desperate note to a stranger. And now, in a cafe across the country, another waitress. Another note. Another little girl running out of time. This wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. The universe didn't work in circles this perfect by accident. Edward looked up at the sky, blinking back tears. "Mom," he whispered, "I hear you." His phone buzzed again. This time, he answered. "Marcus, forget waiting until tonight. I need that information now, and I need you to contact Dr. Sarah Chen at Manhattan Memorial. Tell her Edward Thompson needs a favor, a big one." "Sir, what's—" "And Marcus?" Edward's voice cracked. "Thank you. For everything you do. I don't say that enough." Silence on the other end. Then quietly, "You're welcome, sir." Edward ended the call and started walking. Not back to his penthouse. Not back to his controlled, comfortable life. Back to Riverstone Cafe. Back to the woman who'd reminded him who he used to be. Before the suits. Before the billions. When he was just a scared kid watching his mother fight for their lives with nothing but courage and a napkin. Fate doesn't whisper. It echoes. And in that echo, Edward heard a voice he thought he had lost forever. His mother's, telling him it was time to come home. The bell above Riverstone Cafe chimed at exactly 8:15 the next morning. But this time, it wasn't just one man who walked through the door, it was 5. Edward Thompson entered first. Same denim jacket, same quiet presence. But behind him came 4 others in tailored suits, carrying leather briefcases and tablets that glowed with blue light. The cafe went silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Everyone stared. Irene stood frozen near the counter, a pot of coffee in her hand. Her eyes locked on Edward. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then her hand started to tremble. The pot shook. Coffee sloshed dangerously close to the rim. Edward gave her the smallest nod. "It's okay. Breathe." Hewitt emerged from the back, irritation already painted on his face. "We don't allow solicitation here. If you're selling something, you need to—" He stopped. Something in Edward's expression made the words die in his throat. "My name is Edward Thompson," Edward said quietly. His voice carried through the cafe like thunder through still air. "And I'm not here to sell anything." He gestured to the man on his right. Silver hair, expensive glasses. The unmistakable presence of old money and older law. "This is Gerald Finch, my attorney. He has documents that require the signature of whoever owns this establishment." Hewitt's face went pale, then red, then pale again. "I'm the manager. Whatever this is about, you can deal with me." "No," Edward said simply. "I can't." Gerald stepped forward, opening his briefcase with a soft click. "We're looking for Marcus Delroy, the registered owner of Riverstone Cafe." "He's not here. He's never here. I run this place." "Then call him," Edward said. "Now." The word hung in the air, not a request, a command. Hewitt's hand shook as he pulled out his phone. 10 minutes later, a man in his 60s rushed through the door, breathing hard. Thinning hair, cheap suit, the look of someone who'd spent 30 years watching investments crumble. "What's this about? Who are you people?" Edward extended his hand. "Mr. Delroy, my name is Edward Thompson. I'm here to make you an offer for this cafe." Delroy blinked. "An offer? You want to buy—" $3 million. Cash. The sale closes today." The cafe exploded into whispers. Delroy's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Three million? For this place? It's not worth half. "It's worth exactly what I'm willing to pay," Edward said softly. "And I'm willing to pay 3 million. On one condition." "What condition?" Edward turned. His eyes found Irene. She stood completely still, the coffee pot still in her hand, tears streaming down her face. "Every employee keeps their job," Edward said, "with immediate raises, healthcare coverage, paid family leave, and no one gets fired for taking care of their family." He turned back to Delroy. Do we have a deal? Delroy stared at the papers Gerald was holding out. His hands trembled as he took them. This is real? You're serious? I don't waste time on jokes, Mr. Delroy. 30 minutes later, the papers were signed. Marcus Delroy walked out $3 million richer, looking like he'd just witnessed a miracle, which, in a way, he had. Edward turned to face the cafe. Every employee had gathered now. The cook, the busboy, the other waitresses. All of them staring with wide eyes. And Hewitt, standing in the corner, ashen, shaking, realizing exactly what was about to happen. Edward walked toward him slowly. Mr. Hewitt. The manager flinched. You're fired. The words were soft, almost gentle, but they landed like a hammer. Hewitt's face crumpled. You can't. I've worked here for 12 years. I built this place. You humiliated good people because you could, Edward said quietly. You made them small because it made you feel big. That ends now. Please, I have a family. I need this job. Edward felt something twist in his chest. He thought of his mother. How many times had she begged for mercy? He took a breath. You'll receive 3 months severance and a reference if you ask for it kindly. But you don't work here anymore. Hewitt opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him. Edward turned to the remaining staff. The rest of you have jobs. Better jobs. Starting today, minimum wage here is $25 an hour. Full benefits. You take care of this place, and this place will take care of you. Silence. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the whole cafe erupted. People hugged. Someone laughed. Someone else cried. Edward didn't move. He just watched Irene. She stood alone by the counter, tears pouring down her face, her hand pressed against her mouth. Edward walked to her slowly. Your sister, he said quietly. What hospital? Irene could barely speak. St. Luke's. But I can't afford. You don't have to. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and placed it in her shaking hands. Everything's been arranged. The treatment, the doctors, everything. Irene looked down at the envelope, then up at Edward. Why? She whispered. Edward smiled, and for the first time in 20 years, it reached his eyes. Because someone once did the same for me. This is what justice looks like. If this moment gave you chills, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Comment justice below if you're feeling this right now. We're not done yet. The biggest twist is still coming. The cafe slowly emptied as the lunch rush ended. Edward sat in the same booth as yesterday. The vinyl still cracked beneath him. The table still bore the scars of 1,000 forgotten conversations. But everything had changed. Irene approached slowly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her hands still trembled slightly as she set them down. She slid into the seat across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I don't understand, Irene finally whispered. Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't know Lily. We're nothing to you. Edward wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. Tell me about her. Irene looked up, confused. Your sister. Tell me about Lily. Irene's eyes filled with tears again. But this time she smiled through them. She's 9. She loves butterflies and terrible jokes. She wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. Irene's voice cracked. She draws pictures of the dogs she's going to save someday, covers her hospital walls with them. Edward nodded slowly. How long has she been sick? 2 years. Leukemia. We thought we beat it last year, but it came back. Aggressive this time. Irene stared down at her hands. The doctors say there's an experimental treatment, clinical trial, 90% success rate, but our insurance won't cover experimental procedures. And your parents? Irene's face went still. Car accident, 3 years ago. I was 19. Lily was 6. She took a shaky breath. I became her legal guardian, dropped out of college, started working doubles at whatever place would hire me. Edward felt his chest tighten. 19 years old, a child herself, suddenly responsible for everything. You've been doing this alone? I'm not alone. I have Lily. Irene looked up, and Edward saw something fierce in her eyes. She's all I have, and she's all I need. The note you left me, Edward said quietly. How many people have you given that to? Irene flushed with shame. 17, over the last month. I know it was wrong, desperate, pathetic, but I was out of options, out of time. The hospital gave us 2 weeks before they'd have to move her to palliative care only. Did anyone respond? You're the first person who came back. The words hit Edward like a physical blow. 17 strangers, 17 chances for someone to care. And he was the only one. Irene, Edward leaned forward. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. She nodded, fear flickering across her face. Have you ever donated blood, years ago? Irene blinked, thrown by the question. Yes, in college. I used to donate regularly. They had drives on campus every few months. Why? Edward pulled out his phone and opened a file Marcus had sent him late last night. A file Edward had stayed up until 3 in the morning reading. In 2018, a woman named Ann Thompson needed an emergency transfusion. Rare blood type, AB negative. The hospital put out an urgent call. He turned the phone toward Irene. She stared at the screen, at the blood donation records, at her own signature. Her face went pale. That was you? She whispered. Edward's voice was rough with emotion. That was my mother. She was visiting me in New York. Had a brain aneurysm. Needed surgery immediately. They were out of her blood type. Someone donated that day. An anonymous donor from Columbia University. Irene's hands flew to her mouth. They told us she wouldn't have made it another hour without that blood. Edward's eyes glistened. My mother died 6 months ago, peacefully, in her sleep, surrounded by family. He reached across the table and took Irene's hand. She got 6 more months because of you. 6 months to say goodbye. To tell me she loved me. To meet her grandchildren one last time. Tears streamed down Irene's face. I didn't know. I never knew who. You saved her life, Edward said. You gave me time I never thought I'd have. Time to say everything I needed to say. He squeezed her hand gently. And you never asked for anything in return. Never left a note begging for help. You just gave because someone needed it. Irene was openly sobbing now. That's why you're helping us? Because of a blood donation I don't even remember? No, Edward said softly. I'm helping you because you remind me of her. My mother. The strongest, kindest person I ever knew. He pulled out another envelope, thicker this time. Lily's treatment starts tomorrow. St. Luke's has already been contacted. Dr. Sarah Chen will be her primary oncologist. She's the best in the country. I can't afford. It's already paid for. All of it. The treatment, the medications, the follow-up care. Mr. Thompson, I can't accept. Edward. My name is Edward. Irene stared at him through tears. Edward, this is too much. I'll never be able to repay you. Edward smiled. The same smile his mother used to give him when he was scared. You already did, 7 years ago, when you gave blood to a stranger without asking for anything in return. He stood slowly. The cafe is yours now. Well, yours to manage. I'll handle the ownership paperwork, but this place belongs to the people who make it work. You, the staff, the community. I don't know what to say. Edward looked at her for a long moment. Say you'll keep leaving those notes, for people who need them. Because the world needs more people like you, Irene. people who still believe in miracles. He walked toward the door. "Edward?" He turned back. Irene stood, tears still streaming, but smiling now. Really smiling. "Thank you for seeing me." Edward nodded once and walked out into the afternoon light. Knowing his mother was smiling somewhere, knowing that circles of kindness never really end. They just keep echoing forward, forever. Fate doesn't whisper, it echoes. If this twist just blew your mind, let me know in the comments. Type destiny if you believe everything happens for a reason. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel is built on stories that change hearts. Join us. 3 weeks later, Edward stood outside St. Luke's Hospital, staring up at the towering glass building. He hadn't been inside a hospital since his mother died. The smell alone brought back memories he'd buried deep. But today was different. Today, he was here for life, not death. He found room 437 on the 4th floor. The door was decorated with dozens of hand-drawn butterflies, purple and blue and pink, covering every inch of white surface. Edward knocked softly. "Come in." The voice was small but bright, stronger than he expected. Edward pushed open the door. The room was filled with afternoon sunlight. More butterflies covered the walls, hundreds of them, each one more colorful than the last. And in the bed, surrounded by sketchbooks and colored pencils, sat a little girl with a bright pink scarf wrapped around her head. Lily. She looked up and grinned. "Are you the miracle man?" Edward felt his throat tighten. Irene stood by the window. She'd been crying, but she was smiling too. "Lily, this is Mr. Thompson. He's the one who—" "Who made the doctors help me?" Lily interrupted, bouncing slightly in the bed. "Irene told me. You're like a superhero, but with a suit instead of a cape." Edward laughed, actually laughed. It felt foreign, wonderful. "I don't know about superhero," he said, walking closer, "but I like your butterflies." "They're for the dogs I'm going to save when I'm a vet," Lily explained seriously. "Dr. Chen says I'm responding really well to treatment. My white blood cells are fighting back. She says I'm strong." I believe her. Edward glanced at Irene. She was watching her sister with such fierce love it hurt to witness. This was why he'd built his empire. Not for the penthouses or the power. For moments like this, where wealth could become medicine. Where money could buy time. Where a little girl could keep dreaming about the dog she'd save someday. "Mr. Thompson?" Lily's voice pulled him back. "Yes?" "Thank you for believing in miracles. Irene says most people stop, but you didn't." Edward knelt beside the bed, so he was eye level with her. "You know what I learned, Lily? Miracles don't just happen. They're made. By people who refuse to give up. People like your sister." Lily nodded solemnly. Then she pulled a drawing from her sketchbook and handed it to him. It was a butterfly, blue and gold, with the words, "Thank you, Miracle Man," written in wobbly letters beneath it. Edward took it carefully, like it was made of glass. "I'll treasure this," he whispered. And he meant it. 2 hours later, Edward stood in the newly renovated Riverstone Cafe. The space had been transformed. New floors, fresh paint, better lighting that made everything feel warm instead of worn. But the soul of the place remained. The scratched wooden tables, the vinyl booths, the bell above the door, the things that made it real. Edward had gathered the entire staff, 15 people who'd worked here through the hardest times, who'd stayed when staying seemed impossible. Irene stood beside him, her hand resting on a small plaque mounted near the entrance. "I want to tell you about something we're starting today," Edward began. "It's called the Lily Initiative." He gestured to the plaque. It read, "Leave a note, share a story, ask for help, offer hope. This is a place where miracles are made." From now on, Edward continued. This cafe will be more than just a business. It's going to be a sanctuary. A place where people can come when they've run out of options, where they can leave notes, where they can find help. He looked around at the faces watching him. We're setting up a fund. Any note left here that asks for help will be reviewed, and if it's within our power, we'll answer it. Medical bills, rent, education, whatever people need. The staff stared in stunned silence. But this isn't just about money, Edward said softly. It's about seeing people, really seeing them. The way Irene saw me when I was just another customer in old denim. He turned to Irene, the way she sees everyone who walks through that door. Irene's eyes filled with tears. You did this, Edward said to her. Your courage, your kindness, your refusal to let the world make you bitter. That's what started this. He addressed the group again. Every person who works here is part of this mission now. We're not just serving coffee, we're serving hope. A waitress named Maria raised her hand tentatively. What if we can't help everyone? Edward nodded. We can't, but we can help someone. And someone becomes 2 people, then 4, then 100. Kindness compounds, Maria. It multiplies. He smiled. My mother used to say that every act of goodness sends ripples through the world. We just have to trust that those ripples will reach someone who needs them. The staff began to applaud, quietly at first, then louder. Irene walked to Edward and hugged him. You gave me my sister back, she whispered. You gave me hope. No, Edward said gently. You gave that to yourself. I just helped you see it was there all along. That evening, the first note appeared. Tucked beneath a coffee cup at table 12, a single mother, 3 kids, about to lose her apartment. Edward read it and smiled. The ripples were starting. The story was just beginning. And somewhere, in a hospital room covered in butterflies, a little girl was dreaming of the dogs she'd save. Because she still believed. And now, so did he. This wasn't just transformation. It was redemption. But destiny hadn't finished writing its final chapter. If you're still here, you're part of something special. Hit that like button, share this with your community, and drop a comment telling me, what act of kindness changed your life? Keep watching. The world is about to find out what happened. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Billionaire CEO Edward Thompson secretly buys cafe to save dying child. By noon, it was everywhere. Every news channel, every social media platform, every newspaper from New York to Tokyo. The carefully guarded secret had leaked. Someone had talked. A hospital administrator, a lawyer. It didn't matter who. The world knew. And the world was watching. Edward stood at the window of his penthouse, watching news vans converge on Riverstone Cafe like sharks drawn to blood. His phone hadn't stopped ringing in 6 hours. Marcus appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, looking exhausted. Sir, we need to make a statement. The board is demanding answers. Shareholders are panicking. They're saying you've gone rogue, that you're making emotional decisions that could destabilize the company. Edward didn't turn from the window. Let them panic. Sir, how's Irene holding up? Marcus hesitated. Security had to escort her out the back of the cafe. Reporters were blocking the entrance, shouting questions, demanding interviews. Edward's jaw tightened. This was exactly what he'd wanted to avoid. Irene didn't ask for fame. She'd asked for a miracle. And now the world was turning her pain into entertainment. Get me a car, Edward said quietly. I'm going to the cafe. That's not advisable. The media presence. Now, Marcus. 20 minutes later, Edward's car pulled up to Riverstone Cafe. The crowd was massive. Reporters, cameras, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Security formed a barrier, but the questions came anyway. Mr. Thompson, is it true you spent $3 million on a cafe? Are you having a breakdown? What about your shareholders? Is this a publicity stunt? Edward stepped out of the car. The crowd surged forward. He raised one hand, and the chaos stopped. Something about the gesture, the quiet authority in it. Everyone went silent. Edward walked to the cafe entrance and turned to face the cameras. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at all these people who'd spent years writing about his business deals, his mergers, his quarterly earnings. People who'd never once asked him why he did any of it. "My name is Edward Thompson," he began. His voice was steady, clear. "And yes, I bought this cafe. I paid for a child's medical treatment. I gave jobs to people who needed them." A reporter shouted, "Why?" Edward smiled slightly. "Because 38 years ago, my mother was a waitress, just like Irene Jonathan. She worked herself to exhaustion to keep us alive. And one day, a stranger showed her kindness when no one else would." The cameras clicked rapidly, recording every word. "That stranger changed our lives. He gave us a chance when we had none. And he taught me something I forgot along the way." Edward paused. "Wealth means nothing if it doesn't touch lives. Power means nothing if it doesn't lift others. Success means nothing if you measure it only in dollars." He looked directly into the camera. "I've spent 20 years building an empire, making billions, winning deals, and I was empty, completely empty." His voice cracked slightly. "Until I walked into this cafe and met a woman who reminded me what it means to be human." The crowd was completely silent now. Irene Jonathan is not a victim. She's not a charity case. She's one of the strongest people I've ever met. She works 2 jobs, raises her sister alone, and still finds the strength to show kindness to strangers. Edward gestured to the cafe behind him. "This place is now a sanctuary, a place where people can ask for help without shame, where kindness is currency, where we remember that we're all connected." A reporter called out, "What about your company? Your responsibilities?" Edward took a deep breath. "I'm stepping down as CEO." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Marcus went pale. "Effective immediately, I'm transitioning leadership to my executive team. They're more than capable. And I'm starting a foundation, the Ann Thompson Foundation for Everyday Miracles." He pulled out a folded piece of paper, the note Irene had given him, worn now from being carried in his pocket for weeks. "This note changed my life. It reminded me why I started this journey, not for power, for purpose." He looked into the cameras again. "And I'm asking Irene Jonathan to lead this foundation with me, because she understands something I forgot. That kindness isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing any of us can do." The door behind him opened. Irene stepped out, flanked by security. She looked terrified, overwhelmed. But when Edward reached out his hand, she took it. They stood together, facing the cameras. "We're going to change the system," Edward said. "One note at a time, one person at a time. We're going to prove that compassion and capitalism can coexist." A reporter shouted, "Do you really think you can change the world?" Edward smiled. "No, but I think we can change someone's world. And that someone will change another, and another." He squeezed Irene's hand. "Ripples," he said softly. That night, the interview went viral. 20 million views in 6 hours, 50 million by morning. People across the world started leaving notes in coffee shops, restaurants, libraries, asking for help, offering hope. The movement spread like wildfire. And in a hospital room covered with butterflies, a little girl watched her sister on TV and smiled. "You're famous, Irene." Irene laughed through tears. "No, baby, we're just visible, finally." She looked at the butterflies on the wall, at her sister who was getting stronger every day, at the note she'd written in desperation that had somehow reached exactly the right person. And she believed in miracles, in kindness, in the impossible beauty of human connection. The world had found out, and the world was ready to change. The movement has begun. 20 million people watched Edward's speech in 6 hours. Will you be part of the change? Like this video. Share it everywhere. Comment, "I'm in," if you're ready to see kindness transform the world. 6 months later. Edward stood on stage at the United Nations, looking out at representatives from 193 countries. He'd addressed larger crowds before: shareholder meetings, industry conferences, TED Talks that reached millions. But he'd never felt like this, like his words actually mattered. Beside him sat Irene Jonathan, poised, confident, transformed, not by money or fame, but by permission to be seen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edward began, "6 months ago, I was one of the wealthiest men in the world, and I was dying inside. The room was silent. I had everything society told me to want: power, influence, success measured in billions, but I'd lost the one thing that makes us human." He paused. "Connection." Edward gestured to the screen behind him. A photo appeared. Riverstone Cafe. Before the renovation. Worn, tired, real. "This is where my life changed. Not in a boardroom, not at a gala. In a cafe where a waitress showed me something I'd forgotten." Another photo. Irene, exhausted, serving coffee with that armor smile. Irene Jonathan was working 2 jobs, raising her dying sister alone, and she was still leaving notes of encouragement for strangers. The next slide showed the note. "When kindness feels impossible, it means you need it most." "That note saved my life," Edward said quietly. "Not because I was suicidal, but because I was empty. I'd achieved everything and felt nothing." He looked at Irene. "She reminded me that wealth without purpose is just numbers on a screen, that power without compassion is just control, that success without humanity is just loneliness." Irene stood and joined him at the podium. When she spoke, her voice was steady, strong. "I wrote that note because I needed to believe it myself," she said. "I was drowning, watching my sister die, losing hope inch by inch, and I thought if I could give hope to someone else, maybe I could remember it existed." She smiled slightly. "I never imagined that someone would be Edward Thompson." The audience leaned forward. "But here's what I've learned," Irene continued. "It didn't matter that he was a billionaire. It mattered that he was human, that he saw me, really saw me." She pulled out a folder. "The Ann Thompson Foundation has helped 3,000 families in 6 months. Medical bills, housing, education, food security. But we're not just writing checks." Edward took over. "We're changing systems, partnering with companies to establish living wages, healthcare for all employees, paid family leave, mental health support." Photos flashed on the screen. Cafes, restaurants, retail stores, all displaying the butterfly logo of the foundation, all committed to treating workers like human beings. 147 businesses have joined the Lily Initiative worldwide, Edward said, providing sanctuaries where people can ask for help, where notes aren't ignored. Another slide. Thousands of notes, from every corner of the globe. "We've received 47,000 notes," Irene said, her voice thick with emotion. 47,000 people brave enough to ask for help, and we've answered 12,000 so far. She looked out at the assembly. "But we can't do this alone. We need governments, corporations, communities. We need everyone to remember that behind every transaction is a human being." Edward stepped forward again. "Today, we're proposing the Global Dignity Accord, a framework for ensuring that no worker anywhere has to choose between their job and their family, between survival and dignity." The screen showed the proposal. Comprehensive, bold, revolutionary. "This isn't charity," Edward said firmly. "This is justice. This is recognizing that an economy built on the suffering of its workers is an economy that's already failed. The room erupted in applause, not polite diplomatic applause, real, thunderous, standing ovation. That evening, Edward and Irene stood on the roof of the UN building, watching the sunset over New York City. "Your sister's graduation is next week," Edward said softly. Irene smiled. Lily had been cancer-free for 4 months. Back in school. Thriving. Already volunteering at animal shelters on weekends. "She wants you there," Irene said. "I wouldn't miss it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "Edward?" "Yes?" "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." Edward shook his head. "Irene, you were never invisible. The world just wasn't looking." He pulled out his wallet and removed a worn piece of paper. Her note, still carried with him everywhere. "This changed everything," he said. "Not because of what you wrote, but because you had the courage to write it. To be vulnerable. To ask for help." Irene's eyes filled with tears. "You saved my sister's life." "No," Edward said gently. "You saved mine first. You reminded me why I'm here. What I'm meant to do." He looked out at the city. Millions of people down there, each with their own struggles, their own notes they were too afraid to write. "We're just getting started," he said. Irene nodded. "Ripples. Ripples," he agreed. And somewhere below, in a cafe in Brooklyn, a young mother left a note beneath her coffee cup. Someone found it. Someone cared. Someone helped. The circle continued. Because kindness doesn't end. It echoes forever. This is how miracles are made, not by gods or magic, but by humans who refuse to look away. If this story touched your soul, here's what I need you to do. Like this video to help it reach more people. Subscribe and hit that notification bell for more stories that matter. Share this video with 3 people who need hope right now. Comment below and tell me, what note would you leave for a stranger? Remember, you don't need to be a billionaire to change someone's world. You just need to see them, really see them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. And thank you for believing that kindness still matters. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep leaving notes. Keep asking for help. Keep offering hope. Because the world is watching. And together, we're proving that humanity is still worth fighting for. Don't forget to check out the next video on your screen. Another incredible true story you won't want to miss.